Hey everyone. Recently on my social media, I posted this idea of a social cues handbook for new immigrants coming to Canada. And it's largely based on what I've experienced. I'm sure many of you have experienced as well. And I wanted to use this video just to kind of go over what I'm thinking. And it's not meant to be kind of like this xenophobic, commentary. Instead, I think it's more about recognizing for immigrants that while Canada supports multiculturalism, and we really do support it, I think more so than any other country in the world, there still are norms, social etiquette that are needed for our society that very well may be common and accepted in other regions in the world, but certainly are not common and in many cases not accepted in Canada, despite our tolerance and despite our multicultural celebration. And I think this is very important for new immigrants to understand. And, some people say, should the guidebook or handbook on social cues be a requirement to enter into Canada, or should it be given after someone enters? I'm kind of torn on that because I don't know the efficacy of a guidebook, but I do think that it signals a strong message to newcomers to let them know that this is still a country. This is still a country with social norms, etiquette, and behaviors that are acceptable and unacceptable. And so, one thing that I've experienced in Toronto, I'm sure you've experienced as well, have been many newcomers to Canada, mostly international students, especially now with the influx of international students, that they occupy, and I say they very loosely, but many occupy peripheral jobs, right? So Uber Eats, food delivery, condo security, very peripheral jobs. One thing I've noticed, well, there's many things I've noticed, but one thing has been there is not a clear understanding by many of these international students of social norms and cues. A perfect example, right, is Uber Eats cyclists, blowing through stop signs, blowing through red lights, using the sidewalk as a means to get around traffic or get through an intersection, whatever the case is. And, downtown you've got kids in strollers, dogs, everyone on a shared path of pedestrians, and these rules are totally not being adhered to. And again, I wouldn't say it's not fully their fault. In many parts of the world, traffic is a shared space with everyone: cars, bikes, animals. And some of those norms are brought to Canada, and so that simple action can lead to resentment by many towards international students. This idea that you're not respecting the pedestrian sidewalks, you're not respecting stop signs and red lights. Those might seem as small annoyances, but do that enough times and that shapes all of our understanding about international students and temporary foreign workers, etc. And so that's one example. Another example I've noticed is when you go to protests or you go to universities, you go and there's security or there's people, guarding a perimeter. Many times they're international students. Again, it's not their fault. But if they're blocking a path or if pylons have been set up, if you ever go up to many of them and say, hey, like, how do I get to this place? A lot of them just don't know. And again, it's not their fault. My heart sometimes goes out because they're not being trained properly on how to assist people if a road is blocked. How to get to a specific area. Just help them understand. Because people in distress, they need an answer. And so when people are in distress and they're not getting the answer, this furthers people's, distrust or disdain for international students and immigrants potentially writ large. It's just how our mind works. If you have enough small negative interactions with people from the same region or similar region, yeah, it builds resentment in people, and people will suddenly become more upset and frustrated with international students and immigrants. And so, like, how do we rectify this? Now, of course, there's many ways we can do this. The government can limit the number of international students that are coming all at once. The government can engage in policies that are more restrictive in nature. We can delegitimize a lot of these educational institutions that are bringing these students over here under the promise of, like a nice job at King and Bay or something. And I think those are more, some public policy professionals say that's the sword policy, where as a prime minister, as a government, you need to use the sword sometimes. But I think there's another policy that's not as kind of sword, but more shield or protective or softer, and utilizes both the bigger picture of, integration into Canada with some of the more tactile pieces that people will need to know when they enter Canada. And so I think a handbook, a guidebook for new immigrants, including international students, temporary foreign workers, refugees, et cetera, is absolutely needed in Canada. Other countries do this, other G7 countries do this. Canada wouldn't be the first. But this would really outline a lot of the social norms in our society, and so going back to the example of just simple traffic, obeyance of rules. So for new immigrants, just letting them know that should you not stop at a stop sign, should you blow through a red light, there are consequences. There are local laws that prohibit that type of behavior, and you risk getting charged and fined. And, if you're a new immigrant, that, is not good for you as you enter the country. Also, just being respectful of other people, help them understand that the sidewalks are a shared path, but it is prioritized for people who are walking, people who are walking with their kids, dogs, etc. It is not meant for cycling. That simple thing can be included in the handbook. Another piece, here in Toronto, we are packed onto subways and streetcars and buses during rush hour. And so the simplest of things, I know this is some people consider this upsetting, but, letting people know that showering, bathing is a cultural, social norm here. And it's not to shame anyone, but it is to say that it is a respect that we have for the other person around us, right? It's a respect we have for, being in close quarters with people and understanding that, hey, we are going to be in close quarters, so we have to respect other people's space for that. So showering, bathing, washing your skin is part of just hygienic, being cleanly. It's a value of our society, and it should be something that more newcomers, immigrants, as well as Canadians writ large should be aware of. There's a lot of things that we can include inside this handbook, but just Canadians internationally are known as being polite, and they have experienced just, I wouldn't say a rude behavior, because there's rude behavior from Canadians as well, but there's something to be said about the polite nature that is actually upheld in Canada. How many times today will you hear someone say, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry for cutting you off. I'm sorry for, not holding the door for you. You'll hear that a lot. Even in our big cities, you'll still hear that. I mean, not all the time, but you'll still hear that from many Canadians. And so just letting new immigrants know that being polite, being courteous is something that is valued in our society. Saying thank you, just those small things, you're welcome. Those things really do mean a lot. I was leaving my building and someone was like coming in, the Uber Eats guys, they're rushing in, right, for their deliveries. And, the door was closing and the guy, he nearly just ran me over trying to catch the door. And I get it. I totally get it, because, you're trying to buzz somebody up to get into the building. They're not picking up their phone. You're standing there waiting. And maybe that's money that's being lost because they could be doing other deliveries. I totally get that. But there's an element of just being kind and courteous that I think is missing. And, I'm going to end this by just saying, I think the reason why we're experiencing a lot of tension, which is not being discussed more openly, by the way, between Canadians and, international students and immigrants writ large, is a result of a series of policies. It's not just we're letting too many immigrants in. It's not just that. It's we can do that as a country if there are other things that are accompanying them. Social handbooks, guidebooks, setting them up for success, helping them work with people when they get here to start their lives. Social supports for people are really important. And it's more so that people shouldn't come here and just say that, I'm going to keep all my norms and practices, they have to understand you're entering a new country. There are taxes you'll have to pay. There's social etiquette that you'll have to learn. And, I think if we kind of start down this path, we'll actually build social cohesion more so. And it's not an overnight thing. It's going to take time. So just something that can add to broader policy on like immigration restrictions, etc. Regardless, it'll still need, I think, a social handbook, a guidebook for social etiquette. It's something a lot of Canadians would support. So let me know what you think about this idea. I've had it for a while, but I think now is a good time to really kind of flesh this out. And I'm going to start sharing this idea more broadly, particularly with MPs, particularly with the minister, the prime minister, and the candidates running for office in 2025. It is such an important piece to help along multiculturalism, immigration, and cohesion in Canada. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thanks again.